Let's take a look at one of these rings and holes in the Haversian Canal at a higher power. So here we're going to go to 400 magnification. Oh my gosh, is this not cool? Hi, welcome to Evidence for Faith. I'm so glad you're joining me today because we're looking at some evidence that there is a God. Now, a lot of people, atheists in particular, will say there is no God, that things happen by randomness throughout the entire universe, and the entire cosmos just happened by random. But really, that's not true, because there was a book that came out back in the 1990s called The Unrandom Universe. And the author of this book talks about that random doesn't really exist. I've even listened to physicists talk about this in lectures at different universities and stuff, talking about that random doesn't really occur. It might seem to us that things are random, but there is no random. And scientists now see this in physics and mathematics, and we see that there are patterns eventually. They might not see them very easily, but patterns come out. Now, the thing is, if there is a pattern, that means there's a design. If there is a design and it's organized, that takes an intelligence, a mind behind it. So if there is a design, there is a designer. If there is a plan, there is a planner. If there's a designer and a planner that did all of this, there is an intelligence behind it that we call God. That's what I want to show you. So what I have here is a piece of paper. Now, what I'm going to do with this paper is I'm going to take some very sharp scissors and trying not to think, trying not to use my mind, trying not to think about what I'm doing, really. I mean, it's going to be impossible because my hand is attached to my body, which my brain is in control of. But trying just to do things at random as best I can, I am going to take the scissors here and start cutting the paper, and we'll see we're going to try and make this as random as possible. I'm not going to try and think about what I'm doing. Matter of fact, I'm going to be talking directly to you, so I'm not even studying what I'm doing here. We're going to try and make this as random as we possibly can. So hopefully, let's just count first of all, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, we have 5 fingers to start with, because I'm not going to look at this while I'm cutting with these surgical scissors. So let's begin. And so I'm taking this, and you notice a lot of times I'm even missing. But as I take this piece of paper and I'm cutting this thing, hopefully I end up with the same number of fingers. And as I do this and I'm cutting, hopefully cutting, most of the time it seems like I'm missing because I'm just doing this without thinking too much, and I'm changing position. I'm trying not to think about making the cuts and stuff, but we're trying to get into this and seeing what kind of design I can make with this thing without really looking at it and studying it and trying to make certain type of pattern. I'm just trying to be random. Now, we've done this for a few minutes here, and we're going to stop now because I'm afraid I'm going to start showing blood in a second. Wow, is that beautiful? That is not beautiful. But you know something? I was trying not to think about what I was doing. Now, let's try something else. Let's take a piece of paper, fold it, and take this paper and then start making little snips in it. And we think about it. We study carefully. I'm going to make an angle like this. I'm going to make an angle like this. Make an angle like this. Cut this way. Cut this way. And keep doing this as I folded over this piece of paper. Now, put the scissors away. And you can see this one was already cut. Actually, I had my wife do it. She was an elementary school teacher, so she's very good at stuff like this. But notice what we've done. Now, you've all done this at home, or maybe in school or homeschool or whatever, and you've made like a snowflake. Now, as we look at this, you see a pattern. You see a design. And not just this one. She actually told her I only needed one. She went a little crazy about this. She made another one. So here's another one that's been, notice it's been folded a certain number of times. That took intelligence. And then she used her scissors in a very careful pattern. She was thinking about what she was doing. There was a mind behind it, if you get my meaning here. And as we now take this apart and show, look at the exquisite pattern. Have you ever looked at snowflakes under a microscope? They're phenomenal. In the wintertime, when I worked at a camp in the North Woods, I used to do a class on snowflakes. We would collect snowflakes outside and put them on a slide And we would bring them inside, there's a way you can do this, and put them under the microscope and look at the snowflakes. But do you see a design? Do you see a plan here? Compare that with this. Now, which one looks like a mind was behind it? Of course, this one does. This one has a mind that was planning things out, putting things in order, studying, making certain precise, even measured cuts. This one, we tried not to do that. There's not much beauty in this. Even though I couldn't make it totally random, because my brain was still telling my fingers to cut and stuff and move my wrist and my fingers in certain ways. I tried to be as random as possible, but it gives us the idea. Random doesn't really make patterns and stuff. But in nature, we see patterns, we see designs. And if there is a design, if there is an order, if there is a pattern to things, I suggest to you, there's a mind behind it. And if there's a mind behind it that did this throughout the entire cosmos, there is a God. Let me show you something else that's absolutely fascinating about this type of thing. This behind me here is a chart that's called the metabolic pathway chart. Now, this to most people is just a jumbled bunch of lines and little words and little tiny words in different colors and stuff. This is what occurs on a molecular or on the molecule level inside of a cell to keep the cell functioning and working. For instance, I just got done eating a sandwich just a few moments ago before doing this taping. Now, in the sandwich, there was bread. Bread has starch. Starch is composed of sugar molecules. Well, I eat the sugar molecules called starch, which is not sweet because there's too many sugar molecules. My tongue cannot detect the sweetness. But there's enzymes which break it down, speed up the breakdown of these chemicals. Now, enzymes are on here and they appear in blue in color. And the starch breaks down to sugar. And eventually it breaks down to something called sucrose. Now, sucrose here is just an ordinary table sugar type molecule. It's actually composed of two sugars put together. We call sugar, see, if we just can't say sugar, people will all understand what we're talking about. The scientific word for sugar is saccharide. Di, meaning two of something, disaccharide means there's two sugars. And so there's two sugars here. But we got to get energy out of this. How do we get energy for our cells to function? For a cell to do anything, it needs energy. So the sucrose is acted upon by an enzyme, which changes it eventually into a molecule called glucose. And the glucose, it'll be remember, there's two different sugars here, but one of them will be glucose. And the glucose then is broken down by other enzymes. If you just follow the arrows here, and it keeps breaking down, till finally we get to a thing called, a chemical called pyruvate. And when we get to pyruvate, it goes into a thing here called the citric acid cycles, it's sometimes called. And here, some carbon dioxide is released and things, but it's making different chemicals. A chemical keeps being changed by other enzymes, and it's giving off energy. And we go through an electron transport chain, and then energy is made. But notice there's so many other reactions going on. Thousands, actually tens of thousands. We haven't even identified all of the reactions that take place in a cell every second to keep the cell alive. But they're all going and working perfectly in a flow chart. You can see, even as crazy as this looks, there is a design. Arrows going in one direction or in both directions. They can do this. And these little blue things are like dominoes that are set up. And when you set up dominoes in a long line and you knock them over, they work like that. If you take one of the dominoes out, it doesn't work. Same thing with this. And you have to have everything set up. How in the world could this have happened by random chance? No way. This shows an immense intelligence behind how the very first cell, and every cell has to function. There is a plan. This is a massive domino type of design here. You've seen these where they're totally like maybe a whole floor of a room with different dominoes and patterns. This is like that. You know, that took intelligence, that took a brain behind that to not only design it, but to set it up. This is the same thing. The inside of a cell shows patterns, shows organization, shows a design. Now, in the days of Darwin, Charles Darwin, they didn't know this about cells. They thought cells were just like little bags full of chemicals that weren't much there. Now we know that cells are living things, and inside there's tons of little factories. This is one factory with little sub-factories in it. This is like one factory taking sugar into a chemical called pyruvate. There are so many different little factories here inside of a cell producing these things, showing that there is a designer behind this. This shows a design. If there's a design, there's a designer. If there is a plan, which you can see there is here, there is a planner. If there's a designer and a planner, there's an intelligence behind it, and you see this all through nature, that means there is a God. Somebody did this. This is not random chance, just things coming together. Matter of fact, the scientific odds of that happening by random, which we already said random doesn't exist, is astronomical. It's beyond what we call being possible scientifically. This shows a design. Let's move on to this. I have my microscope set out here, and I want to show you some fascinating things. I'm a biologist. I love working with microscopes. And I'm going to show you like 5 different slides here. And we're going to take a look at these slides under magnification. And again, I want you to look like what we see here, that there's a plan, there's a design. Look at the design that we see on the microscopic level. Whoa, it's going to blow your mind. I think this is so cool. So join me here as we get now ready to do the microscope section. Now, the first slide I'm going to take a look at here is something that's called a radiolarian. Now, this is a slide that has not been stained. It's going to appear just basically black and white. These are creatures that live in the ocean. If you've swam in the ocean, it's possible you've had a radiolarian on you. You can't see them. On this slide here, there's literally hundreds of them. But let's take a look at them under the microscope. I want to show you some fascinating things. I'm going to set this on the stage. And as always, we're going to clamp it in here. And I want to show you this without any stains, just to let you see it. But I want you to look at the designs of these little creatures. Maybe you've never even heard of it. Most people haven't heard of a radiolarian. What is a radiolarian? It's a little one-celled creature, but look for design. So we're going to be at 40 magnification as I just focus this and get it really clear for you. And all these little things you see, believe it or not, these are the skeletons of the creatures. Each one was an individual organism. Each one of these was able to do what you see on this chart here. So that's what they are. Let's find some, and let's go to a higher power. So this is at 40 magnification. Just look at how many there are on this drop that was put here. Oh my gosh, the designs of these just blow my mind. But let's go to 100 magnification now and take a look at these a little closer and see what they can teach us. Do you see the intricate designs of these? I know it's in black and white. There's no stains added to make sure that you can see features, because they're very easy to see with just the white background. But you notice there's beautiful designs to this. I mean, some of these are fantastic. Some of them almost look like spaceships or something, or the head of some alien creature. I mean, some are absolutely gorgeous to look at. And as I play with the focus, these are not flat. These are round. In most cases, they were round. This is the skeleton, but they were sort of 3-dimensional in size and stuff. Now, I'm going to go to a higher magnification. Let's go to 400 magnification and take a look and just be astounded at the paintbrush of what God has done here. You'll notice this one here. There's little holes. You probably notice there's a lot of little holes in these creatures. Like this one here, this is a broken one. Oh, look at the size of the holes on that one. As I play with the focus, because it's 3-dimensional, you can see the shapes of these things. Or look at this one. Wow. You see a design, do you not? Sort of reminds me of looking at those paper little snowflakes that my wife made. You can see that there's patterns and design. This thing is not random. It has a distinct shape. Each one, some of them are just broken up because, like I say, these are all dead. These were the skeletons of these creatures. But as you look at these, you can see, wow, there is a design. Now, let me tell you something fascinating about those little holes. This little one-celled creature had a way of, it has to eat. It's got to get energy to do this. So how did it eat? They don't have arms or legs. God did not design them with that. The skeleton itself is what you're looking at. Inside these little holes was like a jelly-like substance that stuck out, part of the animal, or the organism, I should say, sticking out, and would collect bacteria. They're sticky. They would collect bacteria and other little small particles floating in the water, and then they would use that. It would stick to it, and they would then capture their food that way. And that's how they ate. But you know the most remarkable thing to me about these radiolarians, like that one there, or this one here? You know what really blows my mind? You know what these skeletons are made of? It's really interesting. And most people can't hardly even fathom what these are made of. Find a really good one here so we can talk about it in particular. Oh, like that one. The reason it's black and white in appearance on the microscope is because their skeleton is made of glass. Yes, glass. Like what a window is? Glass. These creatures secrete glass in an organized pattern. Now, there's different species of them, thus the different shapes. But they all have glass, and they all had this jelly-like body to them, these cellular creatures. But they're made of glass, and it's secreted. Isn't that fascinating? That a creature can actually produce glass as a skeleton. So that's a radiolarian. Okay, let's go to another organism. Now, this is one that is very common, particularly if you live in the Midwest. In May, late May, early June, usually, you will find in some ponds, even large lakes, before you really get into swimming season where the water's getting warmer, you'll come across little green dots. Now, you can see these with the naked eye if you look carefully. If you take a jar of, just a clear jar, scoop up some water, sometimes you'll see little tiny, your eye can just barely distinguish green spheres. This is called Volvox. Now, Volvox doesn't have a common name. It's just, we call it Volvox. But it sort of reminds me of the Death Star in Star Wars. It's really sort of a cool thing. Now, these have been stained. Normally, they appear green. And these have been stained with two different stains. One is a green stain, and one is a bluish stain. But in real life, these guys are sort of greenish in color. Now, we got some really pretty ones that are all around here. Notice the nice coloration of these. And normally they are a bright green color. And this is at only 40 magnifications. This is like a glorified magnifying glass. This is not very big. But this is so cool. We're going to go to a higher magnification now. Higher, higher. Let's go to higher magnification and see one of these up close. So this is going to be 100 magnification. And here it comes into focus. And there we go. Now remember, they're supposed to be green in color. These have been stained to actually show different features of them. That's sort of hard to see. But as I look at this, there's a number of them here. There's a big sphere, and then some of these big spheres have little spheres in them. That's because they're getting ready to reproduce. That's what this is about. But anyway, on the blue ones, if you look at the blue ones for a second, you're going to see not just the big sphere with little spheres in it, you're going to see individual little blue dots. Now, this is what's really cool. Each one of those little tiny blue dots is a living creature. And they're all connected together. We call this a colonial organism. It's a whole colony of these little green algae all living together. So that's what we see. Now, we take a look at this. I want you to notice again, look for a pattern as we do this. Again, I'm going to go to a higher magnification. This is going to be 400 magnification. Wait till you see this. This is remarkable. So at 400 magnification, same spot. I can't even get I can barely get the whole organism in here. Notice now you can see the little green dots. And if I play with the light a little bit, maybe it'll make it a little easier to see. But you can see these little tiny green dots, hundreds of them. And then there's like inside this one creature, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bigger ones. Again, it's getting ready to reproduce. It's going to make more of these. But each one of those little dots is an individual organism, but they all work together. Now, if we go to the blue ones next door, you can see them stained really nice. Now, let me tell you what is so cool about this creature, these Volvox. You see, what they do is this. Each little organism, each one of those little dots has two long, what we call flagella, whip-like tails, each one of them. So a Volvox, all by itself, this big sphere like the Death Star, if you will, each little spot of this has two whip-like tails. Now, the thing is, they swim in the water. And how do they do this? They actually all beat these little whip-like tails in sequence with everyone else. Now, how they do this, how do they communicate from one dot to the one on the other side to beat the whip-like tail in the same fashion? Because what they do is they'll sit in the water and they spin slowly and they rotate in the water. How do they do this? Each little dot is somehow, we know, communicating with the other little dots to all have their little whip-like tails beating together in an organized and planned way so that they move throughout the water. They're green, so they use sunlight to photosynthesize, and that's how they get their energy and their food. But they sit and they turn. And if you put a bright light by the water, like even at nighttime, they will start to congregate around that light because they can move, they sense things. This is phenomenal. In the natural world, to have so many organisms making up one large entity called a Volvox and get this thing to move in a way where each dot is communicating with each other, this boggles the mind. Yet we see this, and there's billions of these in like a quart of water or a gallon of water at sometimes during the early part of the summer or late fall. These things are all over. It's a very common algae. If you swam at in water at that time, no doubt you've had these on you, but do you see a plant? Do you see in here a design? This doesn't look like random. This shows a design, like somebody sat and actually built this out of like Legos, miniature Legos or something. That took a mind. That took an intelligence. And if there is an intelligence behind this and building this in the cosmos, there is a God. We're going to look at something that you all have seen very easily. This is a pine tree that's been cut. Now, this is a sapling. It's a very, very young pine tree. And it's been stained with a couple of different stains so that we can see the parts on it really easily. So I'm going to go back to always start with a microscope. You always start it with a scanning lens, which is in this case here, it's 40 magnification. Setting the slide on here, opening up the clamp, pulling it in, so now we can move this around. And here we are. And so I bring this into focus now. Look at that. Now, again, this has been stained. It's been stained with a pink stain, so you can see the pink color, and then there's like a purple stain and a blue stain. So it's got some different stains on it to highlight different parts of the part of the tree. Now, look at that. You can see this pink center that's round with a couple of layers. If you know, trees do grow in layers like that. And you can date trees. You can figure out how old they are by counting the rings. Well, that pink stuff on the inside is what we call xylem. And the xylem is where water and minerals flow up and down through the plant, through this tree. On the outside, if you look at the extreme outer ring, the very far, really dark in color, all the way on the outside, that's the bark. That's the bark. Just inside the bark, you'll see little clear circular patches. Pines produce this resin. Those are resin ducts. Those are places where resin would be found. But they have been dissolved, and this has been sliced super thin so you can see this. But let's go to a higher power and take a look at this. This is going to be now at 100 magnification. But are you seeing the design of this? Now here we're going to come into focus with this. Here is the xylem, the water and mineral conducting tubes inside of a plant. And I do say tubes because these cells are hollow, they're dead. For xylem to function, the cells have to be dead. Just like they're sort of like miniature soda straws all clumped together, and water and mineral can flow through that. That's what we see. Just on the outskirts of that pinkish or coloration of the xylem you're going to see there's some like little squish cells with dark parts. This is called phloem. Let's look at this at 400 magnification and see what we have here. There we are. The pink hollow cells, xylem. Just to the next of it, right beside it, are these little squish cells that are right there. You can see that some of them have a nucleus you can sort of make out in the side, inside the cell. But those are called phloem. That's P-H, L-O-E-M, phloem. Phloem is what moves the sugars and the oils and carbohydrates through the tree that's manufactured during photosynthesis. And they have to be alive for the tree to function. So it's really interesting. And xylem is almost always found closer to the center, phloem closer to the external part or the outside. But do you see a design to this thing? Notice that all of the layer of the phloem is organized, and it's in a certain layer as you look around this thing. And here is a resin duct inside there. This would have resin. And as we look in the center, this is the pith of this small little tree-like or tree here, this pine tree. But again, you see a pattern. Let's go back to 40 magnification where we can see the whole thing again. You notice it has an organized pattern. This doesn't show random. This shows a distinct organized plan. The xylem is in the center. Next you have is the phloem. On the outside of that is called the cortex. And you have the resin pockets and stuff scattered throughout there also. Then you have the bark on the outside with the epidermis. The thing is, it is all organized, beautifully organized, intelligently organized. You can see a design. Thus, you can see that there was a designer. You can see a plan of organization here. There was a planner. There was an organizer. There's a mind behind this. Thus, there is a God. Let's go to another organized creature. This one's a little harder. It might take me a few seconds to get this one. This is another very, very common structure that many of you have seen. What we're looking at here is a maple leaf. Now, we're not looking at the maple leaf like if it's holding out like a hand and you see it this way. This is called a cross section. This would be turning like the leaf this way and slicing it this way and then looking at it. How thin a leaf is, you're looking at the thinness part of the leaf. But you know something? You're going to see God's hand at this too. As we look at this, this is 40 magnification. And if you've looked at a maple leaf, they have veins that run through them and stuff. Here is the vein that you see. There's xylem and phloem here that we just talked about before. And xylem, again, it's going to be towards the center. God had the center in mind when he made these. Phloem's a little closer to the outside of the epidermis. And there's a couple of veins. Here's another one on this one. But let's take a look at this maple leaf here. And I want you to notice how well organized it is. So let's go to 100 magnification. So a maple leaf at 100 magnification looks like this. Now this has been stained. You'll notice it's not green like it would be. It's been stained with two of the stains that we saw with the other thing. But notice, as you look at this, particularly right here, dead center, you're going to notice there's some cells sitting in columns, and then there's some that are sort of just bunched up at the bottom. And then there's a layer on top and a layer on bottom. That's the epidermis, upper epidermis, lower epidermis. And then we're going to see that God has this designed in such a cool way. Let's go to 400 magnification so we can get a good look at this, because this is just fascinating. So as we take a look at this, and I'm going to change my condenser, give us a little bit more detail. There we go. Notice the top of it, that there's a flat layer of cells that are laying down sort of big, but laying sort of flat. That's the epidermis. Right underneath, there's columns with little pink spheres in them. Those little dark things inside each one of the columns are chloroplasts. Normally they would be bright green, but they've been stained here so you can see them a little better. And that's called the palisade region. And that's full of chlorophyll that these little chloroplasts produce. This is where the sun does its work. These things, the chlorophyll in them, absorbs the sunlight and actually uses the chlorophyll to actually make sugars and oxygen and the sugar oils, things like this. A lot of this is made there, but they exchange it. They take in carbon dioxide, and notice the layer right underneath the long columns. It's sort of bunched up, and there's large air spaces in there. That's called the spongy layer, because the cells have a lot of room around them for air to get in. Plants take in carbon dioxide and they release oxygen. And that's where the air exchange takes place, is in that underneath the palisade, those column cells in that spongy area. And then there are little openings that open and close along the bottom of this. I don't think we're going to see any on this slide, but on other slides, sometimes you see the bottom epidermis, that there will be an actual opening in it, and that is called a stoma, stomata, where the gases actually go in and out. There's little cells that make those holes that are called guard cells, but I'm not seeing any on this slide here. But do you notice how organized this is? This is not showing random. It shows an upper epidermis, a lower epidermis. Just underneath the upper epidermis, column cells. Just below them, there's air spaces for the air to exchange, the gases to be made and absorbed there. You see that there's a design to this. There's a design. If there's a design, there's a designer. If there's a plan, there's a planner. There's a mind behind this. It's organized. There is a God that put this together. This is not random. Let's go to one more slide in our lesson here today. Oh, how many slides we could go through, and I could just keep doing this for weeks. I mean, this is so much fun for me. Let's take a look at something that y'all have, but you can't see it very often unless you've had a bad accident. We're going to take a look at a bone. Yes, a normal skeletal bone found in people. Now, this is a small little square of one that's been cut, and it's been stained, so again, you can see things. This is bone, like an arm bone, a leg bone, you know, a humerus, a radius, the femur bone, a tibial bone, stuff like that. That's what you're looking at here with these bones, this section of bone. Now, right now, you can see, wow, this sort of looks like cheese or something. Let's go to a higher power and see the organization of this also. This is so cool. It just shouts the existence of an intelligence. So let's go to a higher magnification. This is 100 magnification. And let's bring it in. There we go. Notice the holes in here. That's what's called a Haversian canal. The Haversian canal is where blood vessels, the blood vessels have been removed here, and this has been stained, but the blood vessels, a vein, an arterial, a venule, veins and arteries, would be going through there. And also, in many of these, a nerve runs through that also. The big holes that you see there. But bone is a living tissue. Bone is a living tissue. It's made by cells that are called osteocytes. I'll show you where they live. We're going to go to a higher magnification, but notice, before I do that, the rings around those big holes, the Haversian canals, the big circular white areas, that's where the blood vessels and stuff were. Notice that these are in rings. This is showing a design again. This is not random, this is a design. But let's take a look at one of these rings and holes in the Haversian canal at a higher power. So here we're going to go to 400 magnification. Oh my gosh, is this not cool? Bet you never thought your bones look like this. So again, you can see in the center, in some cases, these center things have something in them. It's the remains of the blood vessels and blood and stuff. But then there's rings. Then you'll see a whole pile, probably about 40 or 50, really little dark spots that are sort of hard to describe, sort of look like squished things. But they're definitely dark spots around them. Those are where you find the cells that make up the bone. Osteocytes live in those little caves, what they are. And that's where they live. It's called the lacuna, and they live inside of that. And now notice that there's a bunch of little faint lines going in and connecting between many of these lacuna. And there's a lot of little cracks, it looks like, all over, thousands and thousands of little cracks. And that's a way too that nourishment goes into this thing, into these bone cells, so that they can get the food and stuff to be able to make the bone. And that's what, if you break a bone, this is what you're replacing it with, new bone cells. They grow, and if you've ever broken a bone or shattered a bone, this is what is actually growing there, because this is what your skeleton is composed of. But again, don't you see an organized pattern to this? This shouts that there was a designer behind it. This shouts that there was a plan in putting this together. Even your skeleton, the bones of your skeleton, yes, that shows a plan, but even down to the cellular level, how they are put together, shouts of a plan, of a designer. And if there is a designer, there is an intelligence behind it. It's not random. There was thought behind it. To me, that's evidence that there is a God. Somebody put this all together, planned it all out. This, and with the other slides we've seen, this chart, all this shows that there is a mind behind it. If there's a mind behind it, there's an intelligence. And if there's an intelligence for the whole cosmos, that means there has to be a God. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this time here we've had in exploring with our microscope as we're in our new studio today, focusing on things. I hope you'll join us again for some other little creation clues as we go through and see evidence that there is a God. So until we meet again, take care, and may God bless.
Support the show. Become a donor at evidenceforfaith.org/give.